Hi, I'm Alecia Henderson. I work in corporate benefits at NFP. This is our Big Questions video series where we interview subject matter experts on top of mind subjects for employers and employees right now. So today I'm talking with Adom Postma, who is a tax partner and a CPA with MNP LLP. Adom, we're together again, and we're talking about the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, or CEWS legislation. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Pleasure to be back on. Yeah, I mean, this is as much interaction as we get these days. So
that's right, it's true. And so today we're going to focus on some more of the details. Now that you've had an opportunity to dive deeper into the legislation, let's take this time and review some of the commonly asked questions.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do that.
All right. Well, I'll start off just, I guess, a simple question. How does an employer calculate the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy? Is that simple?
I always like to give the if I were to give the classic tax answer, it'd be it depends, but it's not necessarily it depends in this situation as much as it might otherwise be. It's more just that there's a bit to it, but the good news is that the Canada Revenue Agency is already aware that there's a bit to it. The easiest way to calculate it might actually be to go onto their website. As much as, sometimes the stuff we can be frustrated with their technology, they seem to be pretty quick on this one. If you just, typed in Canada and CEWS, CEWS, it likely is going to be the first link that pops up on your page. And if you were to go to that link, they have, sections on who's an eligible employer, who are your eligible employees, calculate your subsidy amounts. You go into that and they actually have a spreadsheet link in there and you can input a whole bunch of information and then they'll estimate it for you. I have done personally for some clients a more rough and tumble one where they can put in some of their own numbers, but I'd say start there. It's readily accessible. You know where to find it. Go check that out. See what's there.
Okay, so let's maybe move to a question that isn't as easy to obtain on the government website. So is the CEWS calculated on a paid or an accrual basis?
Yeah, and this is a big one we were talking about for a while. Especially we had some large franchise clients who they have lots of employees and they were talking about this. Well, they pay their employees and it doesn't coincide with this 4-week period. Like, what are they supposed to do? That's practically it's a big nightmare to go through all of them and to figure out what their paid wages are in that situation. And versus their accrual, and it's calculated. We've determined the legislation, the way it talks about is the government, they need to report the wages earned in that particular period. So if it's the March 15th to April 11th period, you need to know what the wages were paid for that, not the wages paid in that period. So maybe they get paid April 6th or something. I don't know if that date falls on the right date or not, but we then want to also know, okay, well, what did they work April 6th to April 11th, what will they get paid for that time period? Even if it's in the next period, you need to know. So that's going to be a challenge for a lot of people, right? So going through that, but looking at the legislation, that's the indication that we have. So.
Okay. So how does CEWS integrate with CERB? Sorry, got the CERB, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit?
The government's trying to get money into the hands of Canadians to try to help them in this situation. There's now, that was the first announcement was they were hoping lots of employers would keep their employees on, that the economy would generally go the way it was going, slow down, but not too badly. And so they introduced, well, for everyone who's going on EI, for everyone who's laid off, let's give you this CERB benefit. Then the first day of EI claims came in and they basically went, wow, this is way bigger than we thought it was going to be. We need to figure out how to handle this. Let's get, this CEWS benefit up for these employers. Now the challenge becomes the government's not interested in double paying, which is understandable. So how does that happen? Well, basically the legislation, the way it's written is pretty much that if someone qualifies for CERB, they will not qualify for CEWS for the employer. And so where this becomes important is, for instance, if someone had someone who was laid off at the end of March and then maybe is still laid off, but we're in the second period now, and for anyone who knows anything about period, that's April 12th through May 9th. If that individual remains unemployed to the end of this week, that individual will be ineligible for the CEWS benefit for the employer if they hire them back the following week. Because what the legislation says is if they are unemployed for 14 or more days in a period, which would be the end of this week. If they were unemployed until the end of this week, that would be 14 days unemployed. Then they become an ineligible employee for purposes of this CEWS legislation. So that's a big one, right? If someone does that, then you need to keep that in mind, because we've had conversations with employers who are like, well, when do I bring them back? And the answer becomes, well, you might want to bring them back sooner than you were otherwise planning, if you were planning on getting this to help you pay for their wages. That being said, we did recently see some comments that I would call, a legal term is obiter, which is kind of a passing comment that gets made. That's not necessarily a judgment, which is Justin Trudeau, I can't remember if it was him directly or somewhere else written in a release, talking about how retroactive pay, that employers can consider paying back into a prior period, but that we need to be well aware that if that happens to an employee, they may very well be required to pay back their CERB payment. So you need to be aware of that and the implications. The CEWS benefit should hypothetically provide an employee with more money than the CERB would anyway, so that may be more preferential to an employee, but you just need to be very aware of that when you're considering that.
Great, thank you for that. What about brand new hires or seasonal employees that might be coming back into the workplace on their regular, schedule? Are they eligible for CEWS?
Yeah. Some people would think we're crazy for even bringing this up. They'd be like, how can you do that in a situation like this? I was actually talking to an employer yesterday, though, who they're already talking about, they need 10 more employees right now. They had growth plans, and they're going to still keep on planning on growing. It doesn't really matter. This can't stop them. The good news is they are. Again, the legislation, it provides for that. The government is interested in people being employed, right? Like, an employee in Canada is a good thing for the government from the aspect of there's withholdings on that. Generally in normal circumstances, there's withholdings on that, and they're off of the unemployment list. And so, yeah, it's generally available for new employees. The only restriction that we have is non-arm's length employees. So I can't suddenly decide that I'm running a business and my wife, suddenly becomes on payroll and I start paying her. I will not get that benefit for her. Now, if she was on previously, I could get some benefit for her, but I can't get a benefit if I suddenly bring her on as an employee, and that's just any arm's length situation, non-arm's length, situation.
Not arm's length. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got, I think, one final question, and I've certainly heard this one a few times. So, do I need to top up my employees? So, if an employer is claiming CEWS, must they top up their employees' salary?
Yeah, where this question comes from is it comes from some announcements that some of the ways that Justin Trudeau has been talking about this, and this is, these are comments he's allowed to make. There's nothing wrong with the comments he's making, where he has basically been suggesting that he hopes that employers will top up this benefit to the extent possible. There is nothing in the legislation explicitly requiring that. The way that the calculations in the legislation work, it's purely a numbers game. It is based on those numbers, and you get a benefit based on the numbers, based on pre-period earnings, right? So your January to 15th, March 15th earnings, whatever that is, it's based on that. So if you pay them only the $847, if they make more than $60,000 a year, that's the way that the numbers come out. You should get a benefit for the entire amount of that. That being said, you still have the business decision about whether that's something you want to do, or whether you want to try topping them up more than that, even if it's just to $1,100 a week, or whether it's more. There's lots of business decisions being made in this, and this is going to be the conversations that you're going to have amongst other business partners, with your professional advisors, to say, where do I think I got to fall down on this one? Where should I stand on this? So.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else you would like to touch on today with respect to the CEWS legislation? Anything else?
Yeah, sure. So if anyone hasn't already heard, the government has announced that they're going to open the platform for applying next Monday. Right. So that's the one that everyone's waiting for. Everyone's hurrying up and waiting for that. They've also at the same time made another announcement that's very helpful for a lot of us, which is that they hope that by the following week, the end of the following week, so that's the end of the first full week in May, that they're hoping that payments will start flowing. That's very important to a lot of employers from the aspect of, it's all well and good for the government to promise to pay something. If the company has to cash flow it in the meantime and doesn't have the ability to do so because their revenues are down and because they're a leveraged company, it doesn't do them much good. So the promise of the cash being there, and they said 90% of the cases they're hoping to have assessed by then, it is good news to hear, right? For those people who are like, well, maybe I can actually do this then, because maybe I can do the payroll for that, I can hold it for that week and then I get the benefit. We can keep going. So
that is great news. Well, thank you so much for your time today again, Adom. Folks, be sure to check out nfp.com for our latest resources to be posted as things continue to change in this environment.